Hello and welcome to another episode of Justin and Donald Save America. As always, I'm Donald. There's Justin over here. We're going to be talking about a couple of things. The nomination of one of Joe Biden's nominations for was a comptroller, Justin Saule
Yeah,
Omarova.
office. Yeah, good job.
That's that-
Donald really struggled with the name prior to it was a whole thing. He couldn't get it right. He struggles with foreign names. It's
That's
a
true.
problem for him.
I struggle with most names.
That's
And
true.
then I do have a little bit of a futurism topic that I want to get to towards the end of this episode. So we're going to talk about all of that and maybe a little bit more on this episode of Justin and Donald Save America. Before we get into any of those topics, though, I always have to put that call out there asking for your help. If you are interested in our show or the topics that we talk about, the easiest thing that you can do to help support the show, very, very cost effective. It's free. All you have to do is hit the like button, maybe even leave a comment, share it, subscribe to our channel, all things that cost you absolutely nothing, but help us break through those algorithms that prevent that big tech erects to prevent content like this from seeing more people. So Justin, this is this seems like an almost in the weeds thing. I think your average person probably never heard of this nomination. This is not a household name, Saule Omarova. I just gotta stop
Yikes.
all in my head, okay?
Yeah.
But so why should we even spend time talking about this? This seems like a little bit in the weeds. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I can understand why people would think that, but there's a couple of reasons why it's important. The first is that this position is for the office of the Comptroller of the currency. It's a super boring name and it's a super boring job, but it is important and influential. The OCC is heavily involved in regulating banks and financial institutions, so they have a lot of sway over what goes on in the banking industry. And of course, the banking industry has a lot of sway over what goes on just in general across the entire economy. So, you should pay attention at the very least for that reason, especially if you care about policy at all, or interested in policy at all. But the bigger reason why is because Miss Omarova, Comrade Omarova, is so radical and so crazy from our perspective, from even many Democrats' perspective, to be totally honest, Democrats walking down the street, that it says something, I think, about who Joe Biden is, or at least something about the Biden administration, whoever's pulling the strings over there. I don't know, but it says something about Joe Biden and the Biden administration, because you would not nominate someone this radical unless you are also radical. And you sure as heck wouldn't stick with someone this radical after there's lots of pushback against that person. Even from their own party, there's been pushback, and yet they are sticking with her, sticking with this nomination. They're totally unwilling to back down from this, which is a very bizarre decision, because politically she offers nothing to you in terms of votes. She's not getting you any votes. No one's ever even heard of her.
Right.
Regular people. So it's not like some famous person or something. And like, well, we really bring this person in because people love this person and they're going to vote for us next time. No one knows who this person is up until recently, except for wonks, So why would you do this other than because you're actually radical yourself?
Well,
that's the only reason why.
So let's take it a couple of steps back, because even when you were first telling me about this, it was like the narrative out there from people on our side of the aisle was like, she's from the Soviet Union, she must be a socialist or something like that, and that was as shallow as the argument against her was. So let's just kind of go back to that and we'll work our way up towards what your thesis is.
Yeah.
But so what's her backstory? Can you kind of fill us in? Maybe I'll Wikipedia her a little bit here.
So the interesting thing about Comrade Omarova is that she was born and raised in the Soviet Union, and she went to college in the Soviet Union at Moscow State University, I believe.
Oh, good.
Which It sounds like it's a part of an SNL skit or something.
Do they even have to put? Do they even have to put
not.
state in front of university?
Yeah.
I think they're like.
Good point. That's a fair point.
It's a little
Everything's a state
repetitive.
university over there. So, yeah, Moscow State University, when the USSR was still in existence. Of course, this is pre-collapse of the Soviet Union. So she's in Moscow State University. She comes over to the United States to, I think, do some sort of academic research or visiting scholars. Maybe, I don't know. visiting scholars type of thing. And then the Soviet Union collapses while she's here. At least this is the story that I was told. So Soviet Union collapses. She's in the United States and basically just doesn't leave. She stays. And she ends up becoming a very successful academic here in the United States. She gets, I believe she's got her PhD and perhaps a law degree. I think she might have a law degree. So she is in the United States. She's going to universities, getting all these degrees. She ends up at Cornell Law School, teaching law at an Ivy League institution, one of the most influential law schools in the country, and arguably the most powerful legal market in the country, New York City. And she is incredibly influential within certain circles. All right. So what's strange about her is, before we get to that, so initially when people found out that she was from the Soviet Union and went to Moscow State University, that was it. All anyone on the right needed to hear. It was like, oh, great. So she's a Soviet sympathizer. Soviet educated is often how she's described by people on the right, which is, true. But at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, a lot of people grew up in the Soviet Union who hate the Soviet Union and hate communism and hate socialism, right? So just to say, well, they were born in the Soviet Union, therefore they must be, communists.
Well, she had one other thing. She had one other thing going against her from the very beginning, that she was nominated by Joe Biden.
Well, that's
so
true.
Of course, everyone on our side of the aisle would be like, all right, there's got to be something bad here.
Right. And that's
she's from the Soviet Union, must be terrible.
Better,
like
right.
That's it. That's all the case that your average person even needs, right?
And that's not really fair in a lot of ways,
Agreed.
Right? So I'm totally sympathetic to the idea that this is not really a fair treatment from that level, if you're just looking at it from a very superficial level. However, the problem that Comrade Omarova has is that when you actually start digging deeper into it, she appears just as radical as, actually, in fact, more radical, perhaps even, than the surface level stuff makes her seem. So it doesn't get better for her the more you look into it. It gets worse for her the more you look into it. It started. Go ahead.
You started looking into it deeper, right, to see if there was any fire underneath all of the smoke. But prior to that, was that in the timeline of all of this stuff? Is that when all of these counter articles started coming out, talking about how the Republicans are red baiting and how this is just like a new Red Scare going against her? Is that in the timeline?
She appeared before, various congressional committee, Senate. I believe the Senate Banking Committee, I think, is the committee, and Republicans on the Senate Banking Committee asked her a bunch of questions, some pretty tough questions about her background and where she's from and things she said and all of that stuff. And some of them kind of went into that sort of, are you a communist kind of thing? Like just flat out asking questions like that. And I think that's where the genesis of some of this stuff was. Of course, the thing about the left is in America is that they will defend literally anybody, no matter how radical they are. It doesn't matter. So anytime Republicans attack anybody who's on the left, it's because they're racist or they're red baiting or whatever. I was accused of red baiting for criticizing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal.
And it's like, I'm a socialist.
Pretty sure that's socialism. I don't think there's any red baiting required. They throw that around all the time.
So at the congressional hearing, they're like, Miss Omarova, during Rocky IV, did you find yourself rooting for Rocky or Drago?
Hey, are you a Drago person or a Rocky person?
Just feeling it out.
I I know. And so there was one other thing though that kind of falls in line with all that stuff that isn't actually substantive per se. We don't know if it's substantive or not, I guess is what you could say, but it's very sort of superficial that led to a lot of this criticism from people on the right and played perfectly into this whole concept of she's a secret communist idea.
Okay.
And that is that, unfortunately for Comrade Omarova, she wrote her PhD thesis or some thesis. I think it might have been a PhD thesis, but it was a thesis, her university thesis at, I think, Moscow State University. Not the one in America. It was a thesis she wrote while she was in Russia about Karl Marx.
Oh, okay.
Now, you might say...
We know the title of this thesis?
I think we do, and I think it's very... You can't tell what it means necessarily by looking at the title. But the problem with it was she was asked about it. People wanted to see the thesis. And the thesis had been online. It was online, and then was not online suddenly. And no one could get a hold of it. And when members of Congress asked her to see it, she refused to give them the thesis. So as far as I know, nobody has actually I don't think anyone has seen it who's involved in this discussion and debate. Now that in and of itself is very strange, right? Because, if it's not damning, why would it's a thesis? Who cares? Like, just give us the thesis, right? Sure. If it's critical of Karl Marx, then you would think she would be more than happy to give us the thesis. So why is it that she doesn't want to give us the thesis about Karl Marx? Now, if you're gonna play devil's advocate and you're gonna try to, be on Comrade Omarova's side, and you're gonna say, all right, like, let's give her the benefit of the doubt here. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt. I guess what you could say. Yeah,
Moscow State University confirms it has destroyed its only copy of Soviet-born Saule Omarova's dissertation on Marxism ahead of her confirmation hearing to be Biden's Comptroller of Currency. Right. That is wild.
It's totally wild. It's totally crazy. So if you're gonna be on her side, though, and give her the benefit of the doubt, okay, because this is the last thing I'm gonna say before we start really hammering her record, all right? If you're going to be on her side, give her the benefit of the doubt. It's that, look, she's writing this thesis in the Soviet Union at the time that the Soviet Union is on the verge of collapse. Is she going to write this dissertation or this thesis just destroying Karl Marx?
Yeah, good point.
Probably not, right?
Good point. It's like she had to graduate. It's like a prerequisite to graduate.
Right. You would think so, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I would love to see it. It would totally sink her, I'm sure, which is why she doesn't want anyone to see it. But in a way, I can kind of give that a pass, a little bit of a pass too, because for all I know, everybody in the Soviet Union at that time, no matter what they thought, wrote pro Karl Marx stuff.
Yeah, like I said, that's what it's a prerequisite. You have to do it to graduate.
Exactly. So
yeah, so then over those just couple of facts, right? Like I said, that's enough red meat for people on our side of the aisle to pull the socialist card. And in response to that, it seems like there was a whole bunch of articles pointing that out. Red card, it is beyond the pale to paint Saule Omarova as a Soviet infiltrator. I don't think anyone called her an infiltrator, but whatever.
Maybe someone did. I
don't know. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Who's afraid of Saule Omarova? Professor or comrade? Republicans go full Red Scare. So there's a whole bunch of this. This was the narrative for a while, that Republicans were just overreacting. So then what kind of got you to look deeper into this? Because you have a couple of articles. In fact, one of them that I have pulled up here from on Fox Business has this nice little thumbnail associated with it.
I did not make the thumbnail, just so that everyone knows.
Plays perfectly into this Red Scare concept.
It really does. But the funny thing is, like, the more I looked into it, the more, and it really didn't take very long. The more obvious it was that she really is an incredibly radical person with very radical ideas that she's been talking about for a long time. I mean, you can find interviews of her talking about some of these crazy things a year ago, you know? And so it's not like this is something that she used to believe back when she was still, you know, learning to reject communism propaganda from the Soviet Union. Like, this is stuff that she's talking about last year. She's teaching American university students at Ivy League institutions while holding these crazy views. So the reason I was interested in it is because I think there are a lot of radicals in Joe Biden's administration. And this one seemed, you know, so anytime I hear someone's particularly bad, I like to kind of see if there's some truth to that. How bad is it really? Because some of them are just career politicians, but this woman is a true believer. She's not a career politician. She's a true believer. As far as I know, she's never run for public office of any kind. She is a academic, really believes this stuff. And so what is it that's so radical about her? What are the really crazy things? Well, there are a bunch that we could look at. I highlight some of them in this article for Fox Business. I wrote another article for The Hill that had other things in it. You know, you could spend hours just talking about her academic papers, but the ones that really caught my attention are that she did this interview in 2020 on MSNBC with Chris Hayes, who's one of their bozos over there. And she started talking about this thing called the National Investment Authority. It was a very long interview that she had with Chris Hayes. I can't remember if it was a podcast or what, but she has this long interview with Chris Hayes, and she starts talking about this National Investment Authority. So what is the National Investment Authority? This is a proposal that she has to create a whole new public institution, a new government agency. And this is a direct quote from her. Okay. So I'm not taking anything out of putting words into her mouth or anything. This is coming straight from her to Chris Hayes. She says that the NAIA would be charged with the task of devising and implementing and financing. Okay. So this is a sort of a banking institution as well, a coherent strategy of sort of economic restructuring, making sure that our U.S. economy as a national enterprise is structured in a way that actually has a future, because I guess we don't have a future current way, and that we actually work toward making our economy more resilient in the face of shocks, big pandemics, big climate change, big whatever kind of shocks we experience, that we have resources that we can mobilize and reapportion in the way we need it. And then she goes on to say that the NIA would be a essential economic, quote, public manager that would be led by a politically appointed governing board of 7 to 9 members, each serving terms lasting 10 to 12 years. So we would appoint 7 to 9 people who would be in charge of essentially a national economic plan for the country. And they would have these positions for 10 to 12 years each. And then she says, quote, the mandate of that board would be to devise and implement the coherent national strategy of economic development. So economic growth, structurally balanced geographically and sectorally, and so on and so forth. Well, so essentially it's a gigantic national public manager of the entire economy led by a very small group of people who would decide over their 10 to 12 year terms how the entire economy would run and be financed. And this NIA would act as, I think at one point she compared it to like BlackRock. It would be like a public version of BlackRock that would finance private industry. So she's not saying there wouldn't be any private industry. So I guess she isn't a full-on Marxist, but she believes that this NIA would direct economic activity by financing the kinds of projects and industries and things that may not normally get private financing because it's not a good investment.
Yeah, right.
So, and she specifically talks about how this would be used to help battle climate change, saying, you know, that we have to have something like this because private industry isn't going to fund, you know, renewable energy because it's not a good investment. So we have to have this NIA. They're going to make sure that we have the right kind of economic planning because they're not going to be interested in turning a profit per se. They're going to be interested in doing all this other stuff. And she says that it'll be, you know, filled. This agency has all these sub-agencies that have other responsibilities and on it goes.
She's like, so, I want to assure you, it'll be a giant bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean, and then one of the best parts is she's really trying to reassure, Chris Hayes that this is like a really good idea and it's going to be filled with the best and brightest people.
Chris Hayes is like, "Are you sure you want to be saying
No,
this? We're recording."
Chris Hayes is like all about it. He loves this idea, or at least it seems like he does in the interview. But one of the things that she says is, "Oh well, we're gonna recruit the best people." Because they're not going to be going to BlackRock and these other kinds of places. We're going to bring them in to this public manager National Investment Authority, and we're going to get those people, and they're going to be the best and brightest and smartest minds, and they're going to run things. Yeah, because we don't need the BlackRocks and people like that under this system, presumably, because they're all gone. They've all been wiped out by the National Investment Authority. And I'm just thinking, okay, great. So what you're saying is that not only are we going to have this cabal of people nationally managing the entire economy, but you're telling me that the selling point of this is you're going to get the BlackRock people to come in and do it for you, that they're the ones that we should all be happy are running things. Like, this is the plan. That is really interesting. So this is just the first of several really crazy things.
Well, okay, so
but I think it tells you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like, just from a very far out perspective, it's like, all right, you're talking about central planning. I'm pretty sure one of the big downfalls of the Soviet economy.
It's funny. So at one point when she's ranting about this, because she talks a lot and it's very like long-winded. At one point she's talking about this, and it may have even been when I was reading some of the things that I was, or saying some of the things I was just reading to you. And she stops herself and says, "It's not central planning, right?" And then she goes on to continue to explain how it basically is central planning, but she's not using the words central planning, so it doesn't count.
No, of course not.
It's like, yeah, you're exactly right. Wouldn't you think that it's, bizarre that someone who came from a collapsed state, which is what the Soviet Union is, it's a collapsed state, because of all of its garbage central planning, would want to then come to the United States and create a different kind of central planning? But this is the... if we were doing this video for the Stopping Socialism TV channel, which we aren't, this is for Just Don't Save America, but if we were doing it for the Stopping Socialism TV channel, we would go out of our way to explain that this is a reoccurring pattern that happens with all of these left-wing socialist type people. They always think that if they could just get their hands on it and tweak it and get the right people in there and just make the system, just design it just right and just build the right charter for the special National Investment Authority and put the right number of years on their terms and get the BlackRock people in there, like, that'll be perfect. Like, that's the mindset of
tyrants.
It's crazy.
As long as I am controlling the gulags, I'll make sure people that aren't deserving, don't go into it.
It really is a mental. So
like I said, two things. One, central planning. I mean, you're just looking at this and it says, it needs to be more resilient. The economy needs to be more resilient in the face of shocks, big pandemics, climate change, big whatever kind of shocks we experience. And, they could make a small pandemic into the biggest shock in the world. I think we've seen similar things like that in recent history. That we have resources that we can mobilize and reapportion in a way that we need it. Well, again, needing something is a very relative term. So it's whatever they deem is what we need. To me, that's central planning.
Well, battling climate change is one of the examples she uses when she's talking about all of this. And that's the whole point. And she goes on at length with Chris Hayes talking about how oil companies and all this stuff about fossil fuel companies and how they don't deserve our funding. So we need to have a system like this that ensures that we're funding the right things, because the market is not going to give us the right things. We have to centrally plan it.
So I know that, we're working a lot on the Great Reset. We did an entire video on this channel about the Great Reset. If you're unfamiliar with it, go and check that out. We did a whole hour breaking down the Great Reset and everything. But is this like a component of it? Like, is this almost seems to be like the missing link in the Great Reset concept? Because we've always talked about, like, all of the tools and things that are put in place under the Great Reset to basically control the economy. And one of the things that we had talked about, and there's quotes to this effect, that's like, well, we just need government to pour money into these certain areas so that we can spur, we can spur the economy in whatever direction that we want it to go in, right? And it's like, and this is just talking about how we can funnel these resources into the parts of the economy that we need it. So it's like, it almost seems like it's the missing link here.
It's almost a little more heavy-handed than even parts of the Great Reset, to be honest. Like, even in that crowd, she'd probably be considered more radical than most of them. But I agree that it is all part of it. I think it was an article I wrote for the Federalist where I broke down several of the people who were in the Biden administration or they're trying to put into place. And she was one of them, Comrade Omarova. And when you look at her and you put it side by side with people like Gary Gensler over at SEC and various other people, you see that they all kind of have a piece that fits into what we understand as being the Great Reset and this transformation of society and ESG and all this stuff. And in the case of Gary Gensler, he's very opposed to cryptocurrencies. He believes that the SEC already has the regulatory authority to regulate many kinds of cryptocurrencies. Even now, we don't even need new laws. We can just regulate them right now. He's one of these guys who at one point in time, I saw him participate in a war game that was going on at Harvard, I think. And this was before he was in the SEC. And he essentially suggested that the United States is falling behind China because we don't have a digital currency of our own and we should have a digital currency as well. And so when you piece all these different characters together, what you end up with is a picture that looks very much like the Great Reset, where you have government playing this really pivotal role of directing and managing economic activity, both directly and indirectly, through things like, very similar to what Comrade Omarova wants to do with a national investment authority and things like that. You have Gary Gensler making sure that we don't have cryptocurrencies, running out of control. Gary Gensler is a big supporter of ESG scores and ESG standards. The SEC is working on coming up with rules to mandate ESG disclosure in various forms. They'll probably be rolled out either this year or early next year. And so when you look at it, it does seem like they're putting the right people in place that you would want to have in place if you were going to have a Great Reset.
I'm sure it's just a coincidence, Justin.
And
Stop.
And it might explain why you would want so badly, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this, to put this person in place when so many people don't want her in place, and politically she offers you nothing. Why are you desperate to put her in place? But before I do want to make sure we get to the golden share thing before we ditch her.
Go ahead.
Because that really tells you a different story. So in case you are, or the full story, in case you were wondering, well, maybe this National Investment Authority thing, that's not that crazy. The golden share is another thing that she's called for. And this, I think, is also very illustrative. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but she wrote a paper called Bank Governance and Systemic Stability, the Golden Share Approach. And in it, she calls for something called a golden share for the federal government. This is a direct quote. In the context of government action, the golden share denotes a wide range of legal arrangements giving the government special, and by government she means federal government, special, exclusive, and non-transferable corporate governance rights in privately owned enterprises. As a holder of the golden share, the government could have disproportionate voting power with respect to the election of the company's directors and various strategic decisions affecting the operation of the company, including decisions to merge, dispose of material assets, or enter or discontinue a particular line of business. So in essence, the golden share is the government has this little golden ticket. Anytime it wants, it can show up and tell any corporation in the country, whenever it feels like it, that it has to do something. And if it doesn't do it, it has the voting power to force them to do it. It can also remove any member of any board of directors it wants whenever it feels like it. It is literally a sort of an all-encompassing, all-powerful tool for the federal government to control all business, essentially all corporations in the entire country. I mean, how is that not
Soviet Union-esque.
Well, for sure. I mean, I don't mean to. It's going to sound like I'm making a more radical connection than I actually am at first. So please be patient with it.
Oh, God.
But this is fascism. Okay. This is a form of fascism. This is really no different than Nazis who didn't necessarily just take over companies. Instead, they just said, no, you're going to do this. You're going to start producing tanks.
Right.
They didn't necessarily take the company over, and they weren't necessarily communists. They just told the company, you're going to do what's in the best interest of the collective because we tell you. And if you don't, we'll get rid of you and we'll find someone else who will do it. This is really the same thing as that. There's really no difference. It's a private company. Yeah, okay. But the government gets to decide anytime it wants what you're going to do, dispose of your material assets. What does that mean? Just destroy your buildings, get rid of your oil and gas, like anything it wants, whenever it feels like it. Throw the board of directors out and put a whole new board of directors in.
Well, they have a golden ticket,
right? It's a golden share. It's a golden share. It surpasses all other shares of the company. It's a disproportionate. That's the language she used. Disproportionate voting rights.
Wow.
So, I mean, if that doesn't tell you how radical this person is, I mean, I don't know. You can't really get much more radical than that, honestly, for someone in an academic position.
Right. So you put out a few of these articles, right, talking about her and all of these things that she's quoted saying. It's not like these things are being taken out of context. You're directly quoting her in these interviews, like you said, with Chris Hayes and all of that.
Correct.
And then, surprise for me, over this past Thanksgiving weekend, whatever, I saw this article talking about 5 Senate Democrats reportedly opposed to Biden banking nominee. And it's all about how, oh, sorry, this thing is in my ear. 5 Senate Democrats will have said they will oppose President Biden's nominee to head the office of the Comptroller of Currency, according to Axios. So 3 Democratic members of the Senate Banking Committee, John Tester, Mark Warner, Christian Simina, reportedly told the panel chairman, Senator Sherrod Brown, in a call on Wednesday that they would not support her nomination. So, mission accomplished, Justin? I mean, the rest of the article talks about how, like, without these people's support in the split Senate, it's very unlikely, unless they change their mind, it's very unlikely that she will actually be, approved or whatever.
Right. It is extremely unlikely that she will be approved because the way these committees generally work is there are a lot of members of both parties on these committees. So there's a very, very, very tight margin here. And so if you're voting down party lines, it would already be very hard because you got to remember the Senate's a 50-50 split. Even if it got out of the committee, they would have to get every single Democrat senator to vote for this or a Republican to defect. And that's just not going to happen in this case. And so they can't even get all the members on the committee, never mind in the whole Senate. This is just the members who are in the committee to go along with it. So that really tells you a lot. It also tells you a lot considering that the members of the committee are the ones who have spent the most time paying attention to her because they're the ones that have to approve her first. So the people who have spent the most time looking at her, even on the Democrat side, a lot of them are saying, I don't know if it's a good idea.
Yeah, and what's crazy, especially in this day and age, when a infrastructure bill or something like that can be considered nonpartisan or bipartisan if like 2 Republicans vote for it, right?
Correct. Yep.
So you've got like, by that standards, you've got a bipartisan rejection of this candidate. So you would think the administration would be like, okay, well, we tried. Let's move on. Let's get somebody else. But like if you go through this article, it says here, according to a White House official, says the White House continues to strongly support the historic nomination. Saule Omarova is eminently qualified for this position. She has been treated unfairly since her nomination with unacceptable red baiting from Republicans like it's the McCarthy era. So are these Democrats red baiting too? Is John Hickenlooper red baiting? Like, is John Tester red baiting?
Well,
Like,
and
I don't get
how
it.
many of the members of the banking committee said they were opposed to it?
It says
Democrats.
3 Democrat members of the Senate Banking Committee.
3 members. So there are only 12 members, Democrat members on the committee. So that's a quarter.
Yeah.
So a quarter of them are saying that she's too radical. I mean, that should tell you something. There is a problem here. And a lot of times these committees rubber stamp people, but in this case, she's just too radical. So going back to what I said toward the beginning, why does this matter? Why do we care about who's the head of the OCC? Most people don't even know what the OCC does. Well, in addition to the other things I said about the OCC being, more important than people think, why would the administration continue to support someone who has such strong opposition and such a well-documented radical track record, who even on the surface appears to be a radical? You don't even need to look past the surface. You could just be just a red meat, person who's not thinking beyond just superficial level and just say, wait a minute, she's educated in the Soviet Union. She wrote her thesis on Karl Marx and she won't show it to anybody. Get her out of it. Get that commie out of here. That's all you need, right?
Right.
But then the more you look, the crazier she looks. It doesn't even help her to look further down.
Right.
Why, if you're Joe Biden, she doesn't offer you anything politically. She doesn't get you any voters.
Right.
Why would you do this? Why would you die on this hill? It's so strange.
It's very strange.
The only reason you would do it, unless we're talking about something crazy, like a blackmail type scandal or something nuts, unless you're talking something
she's got Hunter Biden's 5th laptop.
yeah. Unless it's a Hunter Biden laptop situation, honestly, the only reason you would stick with her at this point is because you are crazy and you want her.
No, not you're crazy.
You're radical.
You're radical.
Yeah,
yes.
That's
you're
what
radical,
I meant. Right, you're radical.
And you know that she is a piece of that puzzle.
Believer.
Exactly.
She's not a because look, I think Kamala Harris is a radical. She's co-sponsored the Green New Deal. At the climate change telethon town hall event thing, she said that maybe we shouldn't be eating meat, we should change the food pyramid. I think she's kind of radical, right? But she's a political opportunist. She's radical because she thinks that's going to help her win elections. Right. So this woman is radical because she is radical. It's not a political thing. It's her true beliefs. Those people scare me more than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Is this just the knee jerk? Like, we're going to defend our nominee? Are they going to have that message up front? And then, as the stuff kind of disintegrates, they're like, yeah, whatever, let's get rid of her. Or are they going to push for her hard? I guess we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. I don't know what the timeline of these things are, but
it's got to be over soon. It's got to be over soon.
Be very curious to see what happens, but it's, sometimes where there's smoke, there's no fire. This time there's a roaring fire below all of the smoke. So all right, so there is a story that I saw. This is radically changing topics, but whatever, I don't have any segue in mind here, so just going to radically change topics. One thing that if you tune in frequently enough, you'll realize that I, and probably to a lesser extent Justin, are into futurism topics. I'm very curious about, the next leap in innovation and all of that type of stuff. That could be happening 10, 20 years in the future, maybe longer. It's a topic I find much interest in. So there's this article that I had seen that I wanted to talk about on this show. I wanted to get Justin's opinion on, which was talking about how NASA has a plan of putting a nuclear power plant on the moon. So this is an article from Live Science, and it is titled, NASA wants to put a nuclear power plant on the moon by 2030, and you can help. The last part of the title is kind of stupid, and it's just basically saying that they're outsourcing different companies, that they're putting this thing out there. They're taking in proposals from outside companies of who can facilitate creating a nuclear reactor and putting it on a spaceship so that we could put it on the moon and all of that. But so yeah, it says, do you or a friend know how to build a uranium-powered nuclear reactor that can fit inside a 12-foot long by 18-foot wide rocket? Can you get the job done by the end of the decade? If so, then NASA and the U.S. Department of Energy would like to hear from you. According to a statement from the Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory, on November 19th, the lab is teaming up with NASA to put a durable, high-powered, sun-independent fission reactor onto the moon within the next 10 years. The two agencies are currently seeking proposals from outside partners to get this lofty project started, with submission deadline of February 19th, 2022. So that's coming up, Justin. So we got to get our proposal in pretty quick here. The hypothetical reactor would help turn the moon into an extraterrestrial base for human space exploration, including future manned missions to Mars, agency officials said. So my first reaction to this is I love the idea of space travel. I'm not super into when the government wastes tax money on doing it, although, the way that the government wastes tax money, it's not the worst waste of money. I'd rather it be private or whatever. But anyway, so that got me just excited on like a human exploration level. Then my second thought was, I'm surprised they're not like just trying to put a bunch of solar panels on there, like a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
So it is kind of telling that they're doing nuclear power and not solar power.
That's true.
But just on its face, before I get into any other details or anything, what's your reaction to this, Justin?
I mean, the thing is, in some ways, you look at these kinds of things and you think to yourself, like, well, what's the point of this? We've got all these problems that exist in the world. We got people starving. We have all sorts of issues we need to deal with, right? And we got a national debt crisis. Do we really have any money for this kind of thing? But I will say that I think historically speaking, it is very difficult to argue that these kinds of endeavors over the course of all of human history haven't in the macro worked out really well. I mean, they have really worked out. The countries and places that are always innovating and always trying to push the boundaries of what is considered possible and what is a good use of money and all of that when it comes to technological development and advancement and exploration and all of that. Those are the places that continue to grow and continue to innovate and continue to become more advanced societies. And so I really like these kinds of things because I believe in that. Some of them might not work out. Some of them might seem ridiculous in retrospect, right? But back in the day when a lot of people thought the world was flat, it probably didn't make a whole lot of sense and thought that, you could literally go off the edge of the world.
Wait. Yeah, you're telling me it's not?
It's not flat. I hate to break it to you, but it's not flat.
Dang
so,
it.
I mean, I can see, in that world, it probably was, there are people starving, there's problems, there's issues, there's a lot more issues than there are today. And people could have easily made the case, why are we funding expeditions to the other side of the world? Why are we traveling to lands we've never been? Well, what's the point of all of this, right? And some of it was for trade routes and try to find gold and things like that. But the people who funded these things understood that there was a chance that you wouldn't find anything. The money would just be thrown in the trash can. The idea was we need to continue to explore and to innovate and to try to find solutions to the problems that we face. And we're not going to do it if we just keep banging our heads against the wall, doing the same things over and over and over again. And so that I really like that. I think it's important to do that. And maybe there are things we can learn from this and use in other more practical ways here on Earth. So I'm all for trying these kinds of things.
So surely when we bring up NASA, there's always going to be like comments from very pro NASA people being like, we wouldn't have Velcro today if it wasn't for our space exploration or a whole bunch of other things. I don't want to discount any of that because there was a whole lot of innovation that's come from our space exploration, but it even talks about that in the article here. So plentiful energy will be the key to future space exploration, says Jim Reuter, who's clearly some anti-planet climate change denier or something like that, talking about plentiful energy. How dare he? I expect fission surface power stations to greatly benefit our plans for a power architectures for the moon and Mars, and even drive innovation for uses here on Earth. because you think, so there's a concept in space travel that like any extra pound that you're going to put on a spaceship requires X amount of fuel, and that X amount of fuel is money, right? So like you can't just throw bricks into a space launch because it's just way too costly. So surely this has got to be the most efficient. It even talks about how the reactor must weigh no more than 13,000 pounds, and it has to fit into the rocket with the dimensions listed above. The reactor must be assembled on Earth. So, like, this is one of those like puzzle games where you have to make sure that all of the qualities fit, and it's got to be perfectly efficient, not have any extra weight, fit inside of all of this stuff, and ready to be deployed. So, it's like it's a new way of thinking about these problems that probably haven't ever been taken into account before. So surely, I think it's very reasonable to suggest that if we do accomplish this, the technology that would be more possible here on Earth could grow leaps and bounds because of the things that needed to happen to make this happen. So that makes me excited about this, especially because I'm very pro nuclear power. So.
Yeah, and so am I, and I do believe that. I still believe that that's the future of energy. I think it's insane that we haven't embraced that more in this country. But I will say this too, and this is maybe sound sort of weird, but you know, the people who are really involved in this, and the people who are very interested in this, the people actually designing these kinds of projects and working on them, are geniuses, okay, in their respective fields. They're geniuses, brilliant people, right? But they're not necessarily motivated. They might, some of them might be, I don't know, but they're not necessarily motivated to say, build a nuclear reactor, you know, more efficiently for the sake of having cheaper nuclear power here on Earth, right? Sure. That may not be motivated by that.
Right.
They may be motivated by the idea of being part of some sort of groundbreaking thing related to space exploration, right? And so by having these kinds of projects with those big grand visions that you can bring in these geniuses who are not really interested necessarily in just energy efficiency for the sake of energy efficiency, but they are interested in space travel, or they are interested in building something on the moon. Like those people, you may not be able to get them interested in, they might just become PhDs absent a project like this and just sit in some university somewhere teaching college students, not really doing anything directly productive, right? Just sort of indirectly helping other people learn. But you may actually inspire these people by having a project like this in a way that you will not inspire them in, you know, any other way. So I like it for that reason too. You know, I'm not necessarily one of these people that's going to devote my life to space exploration or whatever, but I can totally see how someone might say, I'm an engineer, but I don't care about anything except for something grand like space exploration.
Well, here's this illustrates your point. So I just looked up inventions where you can kind of give credit to space exploration. And it talks about artificial limbs. It talks about scratch-resistant lenses,
right?
Certain firefighting equipment, dust busters, even. So it's not like we have NASA geniuses that are like, you know what, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make the best dust buster that's ever existed. Right. It's like, no, it's because they were operating on these things that are well beyond you trying to pick up crumbs off the floor in your kitchen. You know, it's
right, like... exactly. Well, and I can relate to it a little bit because, you know, I work, you know, we both work at a think tank, and the think tank has a mission, and we have a goal of trying to advance liberty and freedom in the world and all of this stuff, right? I got that job as an editor. I don't particularly, I don't think I would take a job as an editor if my job was to edit a women's health magazine, because I just am not interested in that.
Oh,
you know
what
I mean? Well, that's part of the problem too, I'm sure. But like, I'm not interested in working at a women's health or a men's health magazine or something like that. I don't care about that, really. It's not interesting to me. So I would never do that job. But I might edit something. I might take a job as an editor at a think tank advancing to be part of a mission advancing something that I believe in.
Right.
Not because I necessarily love the idea of just editing all day long, but because I love the idea of being part of a movement, right? So I can totally see how it's not exactly the same, but it's similar in that just because you're a good engineer or a good editor or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that you would take a job in that field doing absolutely anything. You may only be motivated by certain really exciting things, and that's the only way to really get you going and the only way to really get you on board. And so if you don't do these kinds of things, I don't know if the brilliant minds of the world who are really interested in this kind of innovation would do it just to help some energy company make more money, or to help some contractor figure out a way to build things more efficiently or whatever. They may not care enough to do that, but they might care to be part of something like this.
And there's a couple of other things in here that, like, it's got to withstand extreme cold and extreme heat and all of that. So again, the technologies that would be developed to make something like this possible surely has some worldly implications too. The one thing I will say is fully endorsing a plan of like this I can be, the idea of like putting a nuke plant full of uranium on some rocket that NASA is going to launch from like Cape Canaveral does scare me a little bit. Does scare me a little bit. God forbid one of those O-ring things cracks or something like that and we lose the whole rocket. But
that would not be good.
Probably wouldn't be. So all right, Justin, any other last words? Slightly shorter episode. Any words of wisdom, anything you want to get off your chest before we call it a day here?
I can't help but wonder what the mascot for the Moscow State University was. I mean, I would love to know. Can we look at that? Maybe we need to get some researchers on that.
Yeah, it's probably
what was the mascot? Did
probably
they have
a
sports
bear.
Back then?
Probably a bear.
Yeah, I mean I don't know. You really think so? You think a bear?
I don't know. Aren't the Russians super into bears?
Yeah, but they all can't be the Bears, right? They have to have different. They have to have different names.
They just have different color shirts.
The blue bears, the brown bears, the red bears. The red bears, they were everyone's favorite, I'm sure. I don't know. We got to look into that. We got to get somebody on that.
Yeah, we should. We should dedicate a whole. I just looked up Moscow State University mascot, so I don't know what any of these pictures are that we're seeing, but it looks like we've got some cats, maybe a tiger over here. So
you think that's real?
I have no idea. I literally just typed these words in.
No, I think that's Russia.
This is FIFA World Cup
mascot. Yeah. I think it's the World Cup mascot. I didn't even know we had World Cup mascots.
Well, you know what? If we ever land an interview with Saule Omarova, we can ask her.
Look at this building, though.
Yeah,
it's quite a building.
Yeah, Moscow State University ranked 84th best in the world of Moscow State universities.
Ranked 84th best in the world. Good for them. I mean, 84th isn't that bad, I guess, if you're talking about the whole world.
Yeah, sure.
But what were they in 1988 or whatever when she was there? That's what I want to know.
First. By their metrics.
They've fallen a long way.
By their metrics, they were number one.
They've fallen a long way since the Soviet Union collapsed, unfortunately.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Justin and Donald Save America. If you like our show, the easiest thing you can do to help us, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, is just hitting the like button, hitting the share button, even leaving a comment. All of those things help with the algorithm to make sure that our content gets in the front of more and more eyes. If you do all of those things, make sure to subscribe. You could also check out a lot of our content, other content at stoppingsocialism.com. You could also find our different Stopping Socialism content on social media across the internet, whether it's socialist Twitter or Facebook or Parler or Getter, a whole bunch of other ones. If you look hard enough, you will find us. Instagram, that's another one. Justin, where can people find you?
They can find me at Justin C. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter and Parler and Getter and all the other social media nonsense.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.